Welcome back to the Apprentice One-to-One podcast. We have got two generous lecturers who've dropped in today to talk about the 2391, and we're going to focus in on the exam in particular. So I've got Jamie Blatant with me. How are you, Jamie?
I'm good, mate. Good.
Brilliant stuff.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you as well, mate. And we've got Craig Buist as well from Waltham Forrest. Both have been on the Apprentice One-to-One podcast before. How are you, Craig?
I'm good. You?
Yeah, really good. Cheers for giving up a bit of your time this evening to come in and have a little chat about this one. Appreciated.
Pleasure. Yeah, cheers, Craig, because it'd be crap if I did it on my own.
That was part of the brainstorming. We need someone with some intellect to come on and talk because me and Jamie ain't got none. So cheers, mate.
I can't promise that, but we can talk.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the 2391 is a big subject. Me and Jamie kind of popped that episode out the other week just to try and see if there was any interest. Seems to have gone down quite well. There's been a few messages popping backwards and forwards through social media, and we're going to kind of build this along. We've all been brainstorming in the background, and we've kind of come to the conclusion that focusing in on the exam on this episode would be a good idea. So who's going to pitch us up to start off what we're going to look at first as part of the exam? I guess start at the beginning and what that actually entails, how long it is, and what sort of the layout of that is.
Can I just interject first, Mark?
Yeah, go for it, mate.
Because I obviously got Craig on because I really enjoyed that episode last week. And we got some good feedback. Obviously, it's not got loads of views, but the feedback was good. And I always watch myself again. And what I realised when I watched it was I said, I've taught the 2391 10 times. And what I realised when I was upset about was that's not experienced enough to handle this. That's why we got Craig in. So cheers for coming on, Craig. Because it weren't until I looked back on it and I was like, that's not experience, is it? That's just like dabbling. So, yeah. So that's why Craig's here, because he's got loads more experience than me. Although I'd like to offer the Sparky side of things and hopefully offer the tutor side of things more than I can, better than I can.
No, and thank you. And I think it's just a case of us going through and having a chat about the different things, because I personally don't think that anybody's ever, not experienced enough, but every time I go through this course or every time we do it, it's in a different format. We're learning something new. We're trying a different angle because, as you were alluding to in the course last week, this is not a course that you come along and you get taught everything you need to know to pass. It's more an assessment process, confirming that you already have the skills and knowledge that you need to go on site with and to conduct these tests. And I think everyone needs to be prepared in that manner. And we've tried running this in a number of different scenarios. We've tried full day courses, we've tried evening courses, we've tried evening plus weekends to mix up. And I think the biggest thing I've learned across all of those options is it's what you put in depends on what you get out in the course at the end of the day. Because no matter what format you do, the timescales of this course is not aimed to teach you to test. It's aimed to assess your competence and your knowledge of the exams, to prove that you are suitable to sign off people's houses or installations or to do EICRs, depending on what format you do. So it's having that clarity that that's how we need to approach this. And that, as you have rightly said, we can't teach you everything that's in the exam in these podcasts. It's not what it's about. It's you're getting yourself ready, you're getting prepared. Where can you go and what sort of things could you expect?
We're not going to stop saying prep, are we? No matter how, we'll cover the practical. We might cover, whatever we're going to cover in these episodes, the practical is obviously going to come next, I think. But whatever we cover, it's always going to be talking about prep, no matter what goes off. Because that's what's missing, I think. That's why when you Google it, it says it's hard and only 30% of people fail. That's because of prep. Yeah,
I agree. And we've got to remember as well, a lot of the audience on the Apprentice One-to-One stuff are apprentices. These are people who are going to be thinking about 2391. So if we can really break it down, explain exactly what it is, and how to prepare best for it, I think that's a big win for people following into the trade. So looking at that exam, if we're talking about just the exam in this episode, what actually is that? Is it multiple choice? Is it written answers? Is it 60 questions, 100 questions? How long do you get? All the basics.
So if we're talking about the pure online exam, because there's a couple of different theory assessments, but the general online exam is 60 questions. It's 60 questions. You get 2 hours to complete it. So you get 2 minutes a question. And the pass mark, when you go through the City and Guilds handbook, states that it's approximately 75% is the pass mark for the exam. So in the plainest and simplest terms, You've got 2 minutes a question for 60 questions, all of multiple choice, and you need at least 75% to pass the assessment.
Okay, so that's a bit higher than what you find in the wiring regs then, is it? Is that tends to be around 50, 60%, I think, with my very rough knowledge of the training sector?
Yeah, I think the 18th edition at the minute is somewhere between 60 and 65% is a pass mark for. And to be fair, this is the step up that lots of people struggle with. Because if you look back through level 2 or level 3 or your apprenticeship, if you're on that, all of your exams generally have a 60% pass mark. And then all of a sudden, when it becomes about industry competence, which ultimately is what this is, it's industry competent, then the challenge of the exam is an awful lot higher than what you are doing day to day, because you're, arguments about what's competent and what's not without going down that line. This is an industry competent qualification, so it's assessed and it's treated in that manner compared to other ones which are maybe more coaching you to develop ready for the industry.
Yeah, it's good to know that that bar is quite high, to be honest. I like that. I think that's a good way to do it. If you're going to have a qualification that holds value, it needs to be kind of difficult to achieve without being impossible. And as we keep saying, if you prepare, your prospects of passing are far greater than if you don't. So if we're looking at that exam, I think, is it broken down into sort of 4 sections? Is it called the Unit 502, I think, from something that you shared kindly, Craig, earlier this week?
Yeah, and we'll put it in the show notes or something as well, because the information we're talking about is publicly available. Anybody can go on the City and Guilds website, they can search for the 2391, and the qualification handbook comes up with all the breakdown of the exams. So nothing being discussed on here is hidden assessment material as to what it does. So when
the amount of people that don't realise that is crazy. It's just great prep. Go on the city. The amount of people that come to course and have been on the City and Guilds website and looked at the qualification, it amazes me. Maybe I'm just one of them people that, well, not when I did it, because the internet word about when I did mine, because it was the hard one. Yeah, I got to get that in there. But yeah, it's all on there now. And a Google search of 2391 will bring that up. So dead easy prep for people to get done that one.
Yeah, but going back to the point of the 4 main sort of headings, you've got, when you go through the handbook, it tells you the breakdown of the exams and how many questions you're going to get. So when you're looking at your prep and planning that, you should plan it accordingly, because there is 4 sections. Section 2, however, has 3 questions in the whole of the 60 questions, whereas Section 4, which is understanding the requirements for testing of electrical installations, has 33 questions. So over 50% of the exam is on that one outcome on its own. So if you don't understand, you might understand how to do a continuity test, but this exam is checking, do you know the reason why? So if you don't know the reason why you're doing the test you're doing, you're going to lose almost 50% of your exam just on that alone. So therefore, that makes it near on impossible to pass when you need 75% to pass, right? So that's the bit that personally I find, because, and to be clear, as lecturers, we don't know the questions. So City and Guilds state that they have a bank of 500 questions for each of their courses, and every person that logs in will get a random generated amount of those 500 questions. They'll all be broken down as to the right amount per section, but what ones you get from that section is completely random. So I couldn't sit here and tell you the 60 questions, even if we wanted to, because you get differences. But most people fall down. When we see the percentage of the exams after they've taken it, the 4th section is where they fall down the most. And most people will say, but I've been testing on site for 10 years. And you go, okay, so why'd you do a continuity test? And they go, well, I know that I link it here and I know that I put it at end of line. Yeah, but why are you doing it? And if you can't answer those questions, that's a bit you come unstuck with.
Why is that then, Craig, in your experience? So let's do it. I'll give you mine, you give yours. Why are people who are competent testers not getting through the exam on that bit? What would you say is the reason why?
Because I think, personally, and I still go out and work on site, so I'm not completely naive in the education industry, but I think that, you come through as an apprentice or a lad or whatever way you enter the industry, and someone goes, this is how you do a continuity test, link out here, and then go to each light point and go on your switch line or your permanent live and go on your earth and come back and tell me the readings. Very rarely do people potentially sit down and go, right, you've got an 80-metre run of cable, where's your tabulated values and your guidance note, and then where's your calculation to confirm that you're doing it? We as an industry apply a rule of thumb. Well, it's lights, it'll be 1.5. It's sockets, it'll be 2.5. It's, you know, and for me, some of that on-site skill fade impacts in the 2391. And
I find it to be terminology. I find a lot of people, they've got the level 2, the level 3, they've done a 2392, they've done their 18th, and then they get to the exam and they find that because it's level 3 worded, they're just not used to dealing with that terminology, and they'll get the simplest things mixed up. Is one of the big things I find. And you can't learn that. You just got to work it out, I think. That's the same thing, isn't it? But I hope that makes sense. I get the terminology, but yeah, I think, you're right. It just hits it. People don't expect it to be so, I don't want to say hard. I want to say, I don't know. But it's not hard, is it? It's just, if you know, you know. And they don't know.
If the first time, if the first time you've done a voltage drop calculation in the last 5 years is when you're sitting in your exam and you get asked to do one, then, arguments about where that's fallen down. But ultimately, that's not the time to learn your voltage drop calculation, is it? And
I did say last week, didn't I? If you're not sat there bored, you're probably in the wrong place, because you started at the start of it, you said, you need to know these things. It's not a course. You need to be aware and have practiced them beforehand.
Yeah, you're both making great points there. And you're right, the terminology of the level 3 2391 is different. I noticed it. I'm the same as Jamie. I did it a long, long time ago, and it was still a full-on written exam. You weren't allowed your books in. But still today, there is that terminology that you need to understand. So we all might know how to go and carry out, as Craig said, a continuity test, but explaining why and understanding the reason why. These are the things you need to know if you're going in your 2391. You need to be in your guidance note 3, asking your employers, asking your lecturers, seek out that information and prepare as best you can. And Craig's made another great point, because he said in the unit 4, I can see it there, 56%. So if you're even the last 2 units, really, that's all, most of the marks you'd need to pass are sort of in there. The first 2, maybe less so. I can't understand why they've broken off a whole section for 3% of the exam. I don't understand why they've done that, to be honest. It's like a little token section, isn't it, really?
I'm just going to interject. We've already covered a lot of ground here, and what I want to say to anyone who's taking on 2391, whether you're apprentice, young, or a learner, I'm not totally sure. If you sent me to the 10-story office block we talked to last week, I can inspect and test that. I can do all my paperwork, get my table out, go around my tester, visualize it, do the drawings. I can do the entire job and deliver it, But I do not know, and I'm trying to do it, but I can't, if I could pass this exam again. So don't feel bad about it if you don't pass it, because I am not sure if I can pass it now. But I can do the job now, but the different things, it's the hurdle you've got to jump to. And real life testing is not like the exam. Is it fair to say? But you've got to jump for that hoop. But I don't think I could pass it now first time.
I understand what you're saying there, mate. I think that's a good point. We all need to brush up here and there. So if you're going to go into an exam, even as an experienced inspector, if you want to go and retake the 2391 just to see what it's like in its modern variant or whatever, don't just turn up because you've done it before and passed it. You need to really brush up on your terminology, make sure you understand the layout of the books. And that's something that you kind of both have referenced before as well, understanding how these books work and how they build into the 2391. So in terms of people needing to understand what these books are you allowed to take them into the exam? That's one of my questions I had for you both. What sort of stuff can you take into an exam room with you?
So you can take in the guidance note 3 to the exam with you. I believe, but I'll double check, and if I need to put anything, we'll put it in the show notes. But
that's why
I believe that's the only book that you can take in with you. However, there is an expectation going into that exam that you do understand the wiring regs, you do understand your on-site guides, because you can't inspect what you don't know how to install. And I think that's the biggest part. So it's open book, and you have help, and you are allowed to put markings in your book, so you can tab your pages with key headings and subjects. You can highlight bits of text. You're not allowed to write in the book, but you can have prompts to help you and guide you as you're going through to get to the right pages quicker for your exam. But you probably want to be having to do that on a small percentage of the exam rather than
Yeah.
The question or every answer. So, and I think it's right what people are saying about having to brush up, but this course ultimately was designed for a QS type role, wasn't it? And then linking into design where you would be doing these calculations and doing these assessments every time you put them together. And it's kind of being spread a bit wider than that, which I think is a good thing. And ironically, I think apprentices often have the best chance of passing compared to some older people in the trade, because they haven't yet picked up the habits that you do from 5 or 10 years on site of ways that you go around. So I don't think it's a right or wrong time to do it, but I think there is a difference between when you're competent and when you're qualified with it.
And it's hard because it needs to be hard, doesn't it? Because people are going to sleep sound in their beds at night because you've been and tested this installation and certified it's safe. So that's why it is hard. It is hard. There's a lot of prep you can do, but you're not prepping to make it easier. You're prepping to make it easier for you. You've got a lot of weight on your shoulders when you do a 2391 when you sign off other people's work. So it should justifiably be difficult to achieve.
Yeah, I
Don't
agree,
forget
mate.
that.
I agree. It needs to have value, doesn't it? There's no point passing a course if it doesn't have value to you. I want to be challenged. I want to know if I've completed something, that it means something at the end of the day. If anyone can just turn up and get these bits of paper, then it's all pointless. And Craig has said there about the highlighting of your book and going back to answer things that you maybe don't know. I think that's a good thing. You can reference your books. And if there's something you're not quite sure on, go and tackle it. But, and this isn't important, but don't start doing that as you're going through the exam. So if we want to speak about this a little bit, just a bit of kind of exam savvy, if you like, the way to navigate around it. The way I've always done it is to go through all of the questions, read them carefully, read all of the answers, and trust my gut on all of them. Answer
all
them
of the answers.
Yeah.
All
and any I'm not quite sure of, you can flag them. You two will know better than me about this, but when I last did a test, it was the 18th edition. You flag the ones you're not sure about. If you've got time at the end, go into your books and have a little read and try and make clear in your mind.
Stop. You've done it wrong. When you flag them, what do you always do?
Answer them.
Always answer the best you can at the time, then flag it. Don't flag them and leave them blank, because 0% of nothing is fuck all. Yeah. 1 in 4 chances, 25%. So yeah, it's not a cheat, it's just a tactic. Don't just go, I'll come back to that one later, because that 2 minutes soon gets eaten up, and at the end you'll be like, oh, I flagged 10 questions and I've answered none of them. Even if it's just a dartboard job. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
you can have a bit slack, but you've got to have sometimes on site you are making educated guesses. Don't feel like that's cheating. I think it's that one, because you'll dig yourself into the wrong hole. So just be aware of that. And I realised I just swore then, and sorry, but I really want to get that point across.
Time management is hugely important, and I've just double checked us to being on this. You can actually take in your 18th edition, your on-site guide, and your guidance note 3 to all of your exams, barring the visual inspection, which we'll do in a later podcast. So you can have all of your books with you at all times.
Because why? Because on site, you'd have them wouldn't you? Which is great news. You can take it to the exam, the same books that you need when you're doing this actual job, which I think is great, because they didn't used to do that. I used to always hate the old exam. Like, you can't take your books in. Well, I'm not going to go to site without them. So I never understood that. But yeah, that's good news. You can take all of them in.
Yeah, I think the time management's key. You will often find with City and Guilds, like Mark said, when you flag the questions, you may find a few questions later that actually helps you answer one that you flagged.
Questions, answer questions.
So as you have to answer them, but then flag them. But yeah, I think just being confident and set for that prep is really the key important part. And if you've done your homework, if you've got a good working knowledge of the wiring regs and the guidance note and your on-site guide, and when I say working knowledge, I don't mean you've memorized and can quote every single reg in the book, because none of us can do that. And if we said we could, we'd be lying. But having an understanding of knowing that inspection sits under X chapter and what bit of the book, or knowing that test instruments sit under chapter 4 in the guidance note, or just having different ways that you know how to get to some information quickly, that to me would be deemed as a working knowledge of the regs, where you know about 80% of what you want to say, and you just have to go and have a quick flick and check. Because every time I write an EICR, I still go back and confirm what I think it's sat against in the book and the regs before I hand it over to a client. And the exam's testing your ability to do that.
Yeah. Totally. And as we said, if you you'll get some gimme questions, there'll be some that take you seconds. And then
Freebies.
hopefully at the end, if you've got that 5 or 6 you're not quite sure about, you can kind of dig into your books, spend a bit of time on them, but don't waste 50% of the entire exam trying to figure out the answer to one question, because that is just pointless. Move on and flag it for later.
One I see is there's a lot of talk about 2 minutes a question, and it is 2 minutes a question, but that's an average. So just remember, if you do get a gimme or a freebie, you've banked 2 more minutes virtually. And some questions won't take 30 seconds. So don't sit there obsessed with that 2 minutes number. I've seen people fall foul of that. If you just want to sit there like that for 2 minutes, you'll find out that 2 minutes is quite a long time. And obviously, if you can add to that early on with some gizzers or freebies, at the end, you can come back and sweat over a few bits and bobs. But don't. It is 2 minutes a question. Don't laser focus on it, if that makes sense. It can throw you out as well.
But also don't focus on 100% would be my advice.
I never do.
Because they're not saying you have to do 100% to pass. So I've just done some very quick maths with my bad calculations, and 75% of the exam is approximately 45 questions to pass. So you've got a margin of 15 questions to not know and not have a clue on, and still potentially be able to pass your exam. So whilst I am not sitting here saying that we should all be aiming for 75% and the lower standard of the benchmark, beating yourself up and stressing yourself out in the middle of an exam is also probably not your best tactic to being successful.
Yeah, and I would say as well, read all of the questions very carefully, because some of the terminology and wording that City and Guilds use, in my experience, doesn't always make sense. So take your time, read it carefully. Don't just like skim it and then think, oh, it's clearly option B or whatever. Take your time, read it slowly and carefully, and then read all of the answers in the same way.
I'll give an example of that. Also, I'm an interrupting king to that. I'll give an example of that comes across so much for me is, I might get this wrong myself now. So if I do, I'm just going to write it out because I make mistakes. Yeah. Maximum tabulated, maximum measured, and maximum fault loop impedance are 3 different things. So is it the measured is what you get off the meter, the tabulated is what's in the regs, and the what is it? I can't remember the word now.
It then gives you the option of the 80%.
The 8%, what's that referred to as? I've just gone a blank. Tabulated, measured, and the 80% is called something else, isn't it? Acceptable to the term it as.
Yeah, it's classed as your maximum.
They're
your
3 different things.
Effectively. So, yeah. and it's knowing the difference in the books on that example that Jamie's given. So your regs book is the maximum tabulated, whereas your on-site guide and your guidance note is maximum the 80% rule of thumb for your maximum measured results, which
that's it. And then obviously you've got the measured value you've got. So the actual value, the maximum measurable and the maximum acceptable for the device. The amount of people that come out of exam go, or do the mock pads go, it's that one. No, it's not. Oh, you're like, yeah, you just lost an easy one there because 3 little words that you need to know your way around. So that's one I see a lot.
But that comes back to your prep of understanding the difference between why you've got, because you've effectively got the same table in 3 books, but 2 of the books have a different result to the third one. So it's making sure you have that understanding knowledge as to why. And if you don't, ask, because that's why you effectively got a few days or a few evenings, however it's happening, to be prepped, but also be checking with your employer, because you take that to real world. And I don't know what Jamie and Mark do, but I always state on my certificates what value I measured against. Was I going by the 80% rule, or was I going by tabulated? And I will put in the comments, these are based on values in the guidance note or based on values in the 18th edition, because it's your liability at the end of the day.
Arse covered into it then. You've covered your arse totally. I've used this value, you do the maths. Or I've used this value, I've done the maths for you. And there's a lot of intricacies to testing like that you need to be aware of that happens when you end up doing testing. But in the exam, there's no leeway. It's an exam. It's hard and fast.
That's it. They want to know what the actual answer to the question is. And you're right. When you're out on site doing testing and you've got an installation that's not energized, not in use, then measuring to the maximum tabulated value might not be the best method because it's not in use and up to temperature. So you use that 80% roughly rule of thumb. I don't know where they first brought that figure from, but there's kind of an acceptance that takes that into account. And that's the purpose of doing it. But if it's asking for something in the book, in your question, make sure you read it, make sure you choose the right answer, because you won't get a mark for just saying something off the top of your head that you think's right.
It's the most common error on the mock papers for me. And obviously you can iron it out then, but it's the most common problem on the mock papers, that one.
And generally, terminology is obviously a factor, but for me, when you skim read a question, it's probably asked you does not, and you've read does, and that then, and City and Guilds have a habit of one of the answers will be the answer that if you read it as does, will be there as an option to pick when you should have picked does not. So I think the advice of spending the time and reading the question has got to be invaluable for you to be doing that, to be successful.
A lot of people don't like that kind of one. They think it's trick questions. Yeah, damn straight it is, because life's tricky. Yeah, real testing is tricky. That's why they do it like that. I think it's purposeful. I agree with it, because you better make sure you're reading stuff right when you're on site doing the real job. So you should do it in the exam. It's a good life lesson. I like the way they do it. Some people would disagree, but I like it.
Accuracy is key, isn't it, with testing and inspecting, and encouraging that in the purpose of training is a good thing. I don't think we should be really mixing things up to the point we're confusing everyone, but missing out does not and does, like you say, that's just paying attention. So make sure you do read that carefully. Craig mentioned very early on, I just want to pull back to that a bit, that there is actually a written exam part of this. Are we going to tie this in with this episode? Is there a kind of section of questions where you have to provide written answers as well?
Yeah, so we can tie it with this one. So basically, on the theory side, it comes in, well, depends how you class it as theory or practical, but there's 3 parts to writing, if you like. So there's the online exam, there's some short answer questions which ask you to find some regulations and answer some set questions, which again, you have your books for, and you can go through them, and I believe you get about an hour for that. And then there's a visual inspection part to the writing as well, where you're given a pack of pictures and you have to identify a number of faults on each of the pictures which are provided, and I believe you get 30 minutes for that part of the exam. But those 3 are the written elements to the 2391, if you like.
So you've got your 2-hour multi-choice and then an hour on some written questions and half an hour for the pictures, roughly speaking. And we'll pick up with that later on in this series. We're not going to cover it now. I just wondered if that was another big element of the course, or if it's just tied in with kind of the other stages of the training to do with the practical and the theory.
Generally, when I'm doing the courses, we will have dedicated time, because they are done in a room, in a controlled environment where you are allowed to be there with your books, and you can have feedback and different elements to go with it. So they're not quite as passive, religiously intense as the online exam. I think officially they're classed as part of the practical, but for me, they sit kind of separate to that. And we'll definitely do some time around it. But ultimately, the questions that the answers are in the books that they would expect you to know. And again, they are asking you anything and everything from safe isolation procedures to finding a couple of regs in the book where you would have put faults against items. So they're testing that real world working experience. So if you're looking at an installation, can you start to identify what the faults are and what the codes are? And what I like about the assessment, because I know we'll end up in a code war as to what's what, City and Guilds, and I have to say City and Guilds because I don't teach AEL, so it's maybe slightly different, but with City and Guilds, they give the assessor accepted answers for the codes. But then they do have a part in the assessment book that says, however, you can use your professional judgment to agree or disagree with what the candidate says. So it's not there is a high and right. What it does say is you will have different coloured pictures in your packs. And the different colour codes mean a different number of faults need to be found within that visual inspection on that photograph.
That's really interesting. We'll be able to pick up with that, like you say, in a future episode of this show. Is there anything that you two would like to add before we kind of give our best last tips? Have you got anything else you want to mention to do with the multi-choice exam?
I'll give a bit. So I'm not sponsored, and I never will be by the IET, not after my outburst on Twitter today, but this book is worth its weight in gold. Yeah. The pre-app, this is told, it's not just a load of questions, it's the answers, but also there's a load of advice at the front about how the questions are worded. I used to like this. I used to give all this big spiel before I start the exam about your flagging and all that, and they've basically nicked it off me and put it in here. So 6 months before you think about taking an exam, This is 20 quid. I think an exam's 100 quid reset, isn't it? Something like that. But yeah, it's this one. It's this one here. I'm not sponsoring it, but I've got a copy of it myself as my own copy that I've just got because it's good. So it's worth its weight in gold.
I'll pop a link in the show notes for that one. And like you say, familiarising yourself with how the questions are set out is never a bad thing. You don't want to go and revise every single question in the book because you never will, but just kind of get a rough idea of how they look and what they feel like.
Don't use online websites. They're full of shit. Yeah, don't use online websites where people wrote their own questions. Yeah, this is the official book. These are worded proper. I've seen some terrible things online. Yeah, so just don't use them as my advice unless Craig can point me in the right direction, some decent ones.
Well, I think for me, I think any exam prep and any questions are helpful because that's the bit that people struggle with is the wording of the questions. And obviously official sources like the IET and stuff is always going to be the best place to go. But my only point to this would be the only question that's a stupid one is the one you don't ask. So ask your employer, ask your lecturer, ask your mates on site and see what you know or the other people you're on the course with because nobody knows all of it. And there's no point sitting there as we give a brief overview as to the outcomes of what to sort of expect to be thinking, well, I don't know that. And then going into an exam, still not knowing that because then you're kind of setting your own outcome before you go in.
Definitely. So I'm gonna give my tips of what I think people would be best doing, and then you guys can just chuck your final thoughts in there as a best tip, and we'll wrap this one up. I'm going to say that if you're going through the exam process, make sure you flag those questions. If you are completing your exam in rapid, fast time and you find yourself with half an hour left at the end, don't get up and walk out. Go back through them and have a double and triple check. Use all of the time you've got. So that'd be my best tips. Just looking at the multi-choice exam. What would be you two on that one?
For me, just prepare and ask the questions because if you've prepared and you've used your books well, you'll be fine. I don't want to get into the stage of scaremongering where people think this is unattainable or impossible because it's not. It is a challenge, but if you're prepared and you know what you're doing, you'll be fine.
And I would say this is a really bone one, yeah? Right. You know, before you go in the exam, I throw my students out of the room 30 minutes before making go and have a walk around outside. Yeah? So if you don't do that to you, leave half an hour before the exam starts, go for a walk around outside, get some fresh air, move around, you've been sat down 2 hours, go to the toilet, yeah, because I'm on 4 minutes for a piss. I don't know about everyone else. That's 2 questions I can't do. So make sure you do just basic stuff like that. I mean, it's just before you go in, like that. Make sure you've been to the toilet, you've got a drink, and you've had a bit of a breather outside because you can't wind yourself up all Friday morning and then go to that exam and expect to do it because you'll just, and I've seen people do it. So yeah, that's one for me. It's dead basic.
Don't forget the basics. It's a good tip, definitely. I want to thank you both again for coming on to talk on the Apprentice One-to-One podcast. This has been absolutely brilliant. I know all the apprentices are going to get a lot from it, and it's really good of you both to give up your free time. We are sat here on a Wednesday evening. Jamie's in a hurry because he's off to go and play darts and get drunk, probably.
Just darts.
Craig's preparing for his wife's birthday that's coming up tomorrow, so we're all busy with other bits and pieces. So I do appreciate you giving your time. And as I said, we're going to bring more episodes of this. We're going to try and do one a week. It might not end up being that regular, but we'll give it our best shot. We're going to try and cover every single area of the 2391. So thank you all again for watching and tuning in, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Mark. Cheers.